This is Mario Andretti, and you are listening to Below the Yellow Line.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Below the Yellow Line, episode number 204 on tap today. It's always great to talk to the rising stars of racing. We already know about the established veterans, the champions, the ones that have set their names in stone for the Hall of Fame, but we may have a driver that might be looking to do that himself here in a couple of decades. Josh Pierson, Indy NXT driver for HMD Motorsports, the youngest ever starter in the history of Le Mans, a guy who, even though he's only 18 years old, has already accomplished quite a lot. Josh, thank you so much for joining the show today. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing great. Always great. Like I said, to talk to guys like you who, you're young, but you've already accomplished a lot more than most of us have in life in general, a lot more than a lot of other race car drivers have. So take us back to the start. When did a young Josh Pierson fall in love with racing and know this was what you wanted to do for a living?
Yeah, it's been quite the journey when I look back on it now. I've come a long way from starting in karts to where I am now, and I've had a lot of really, really crazy experiences from such a young age, and I've participated in some very historic events and very monumental events in the history of motorsports. But when I look back to really where it all began, I started karting at 2, so I don't even remember, the first time I was behind the wheel of a go-kart. And part of that, I think, ties into why I love the sport so much. It's been a part of my life since, before I can even recall. And I think that has something to do with why I've always been so passionate for it. It really comes down to my parents, putting me in a go-kart and Chris Egger at the local kart track, letting me do that from such a young age and telling me, look, the track's closed on Mondays, you can come out and join us. And I'll have my kids teach you how to drive. So it's been a long ride from then, but I think it was really when I was around 7 or 8 and starting to, progress to the more national stage that I actually wanted to, pursue it as a career. It was very early on that I kind of made this decision that this is something I wanted to do. And ever since then, I've just been absolutely in love with racing. It's probably, I would say, all I can think about from day to day. I'm really enthralled with what this sport has to offer, and it's something truly unique to get to compete in it.
Well, I've heard a lot of stories as somebody who covers NASCAR about NASCAR drivers starting in go-karts when they're 5, maybe even 4. I've never heard somebody start racing at 2. When you talk about doing something and saying it's all I've ever known, it's literally all you've ever known, and that's a great story. So you go from driving a go-kart at 2 years old. I have no clue what I was doing at 2 years old. It was not driving anything in any capacity, to 14 years later, just 14 years, being the youngest ever starter in the 24 hours of Le Mans. What would that feel like, just in general, to walk onto that historic racetrack, but also make some history along the way?
Yeah, it's a crazy event. I don't think I really knew what it was going to be like. The events that led to that kind of moment are very, it all happened very quick. It's not something that was like, it was kind of almost like a spur of the moment thing, really. I had just finished my second year of USF 2000 on the road to Indy, so essentially F4 here in the States. And it was a matter of looking to what I was going to do next year. And I've always, my dad's been my manager and kind of my acting body, and we've always been looking to have something lined up for next year early on in the year. It's always been a case of, let's find what we can do next year now. And so I kind of was left with 2 options early on in the year. It was either go to Indy Pro 2000, which is what it was at the time, now USF Pro 2000, and stay on the road to Indy. Or I had managed my driver coach, Steven Simpson, back in 2020 at St. Pete. He saw something in my driving style and said, hey, I used to drive this LMP2 car, and I think it would really suit your driving style. I want to get you a test with PR1 Mazda Motorsports at Buttonwillow. And so he did. He got me this test day, and I went there and kind of didn't think much of it. I was just there having a good time, driving a car that's way quicker than anything I've ever been in. And I wasn't really, expecting much out of it aside from just the experience. And later, somehow Zach Brown got a hold of it. And so when I was in Barber in 21, I ended up in his RV, and he said, look, I've heard some stories from this test that you did at Buttonwillow, and I'd like to have you in one of my P2 cars for United Autosports at the Red Bull Ring in Austria. And, it was only, I think, a couple of weeks later that I had 2 contracts on my desk, one for the World Endurance Championship and one for IMSA. And I don't, it was one of those things. It's like, am I going to go in the next stage of the road to Indy, or am I going to go to WEC and IMSA? And I thought that, even if I wanted to return like I am now to Indy NXT and on the road to Indy, I still think I'm going to learn way more from a year or two in sports cars and in endurance than I am from what I'm doing now. The history side of it was more of a bonus. I did go to Le Mans the year before the history making with the team. That was when we announced it. And I remember, thinking that this is such a crazy event. I'd grown up watching Le Mans. The Truth in 24 documentaries by Audi, I don't know if you've ever seen those, but that was something that when I was really little, I constantly watched on airplanes. I've always loved Le Mans, and I would always watch those documentaries and just try to imagine what it was like to be there. And going into that first year, I don't think I had any idea what to expect. It's such a unique event. It's dark at night. It's one of those events where I think it doesn't really live up to anything that you're imagining. It's going to be difficult, but it's way bigger than what you think. And after doing Daytona and experiencing what that's like, the 24 of Le Mans is just a completely unique challenge. It's so difficult compared to Daytona. Just cutting down on one driver can make all the difference. But really, I think it comes down to the concentration that's required there. The speeds are so much higher. And at night when it's dark, man, it's really hard to see. It's one of those tracks that you're driving a lot off of feel and muscle memory. And I can tell you almost every bump that's around that place.
Well, I think when you talk about Le Mans and that history, I didn't necessarily grow up watching Le Mans. I was pretty much a stock car racing guy exclusively. I did start to watch it, I think the year after I saw the Ford v Ferrari movie. Great movie, by the way. Go watch that. And then, of course, NASCAR brought Garage 56 there last year. But you're right, there's nothing like it. We have the Indy 500, F1 has Monaco, NASCAR has Daytona. But Le Mans is just truly a different beast, 24 hours of just intensity. And, it might not look like the most thrilling thing on TV or on the radio, but, like you mentioned, dark at night, all those challenges that await you guys. It truly is one of the best tests for a race driver that there is. I can see on your shirt there, you got your HMD shirt on. You got a really good team there around you at HMD Motorsports, got some good teammates there. How did that deal all come together, and how do you feel about the state of your Indy NXT team?
Yeah, HMD Motorsports is a great group. I've enjoyed working with them for the past year, and now obviously looking forward to continuing what we've been working on this year. It came up around actually, a little bit, Mike Marini and AJ, those guys running this team, and also, the Malukas family. They do a great job running this program with so many cars as well. It's not something that you would expect. I think when I signed the first year and they told me there was going to be 8 or 9 cars, I remember being a little bit concerned, but the way they've run it is quite interesting and it works really well. I don't think there's another team out there capable of running that many cars and pulling it off like they do. So, hats off to them for that and making the program run really smoothly. My introduction to them, actually, Mike Marini, I've known for quite a while. I remember working with him in karting a bit when I was younger. It wasn't really like something that came about from that start of my career that early on, but it was more of a plan that I had with Steven and my dad. IndyCar has always been my goal. Even when I was racing sports cars, I wanted to go to IndyCar. And the sports car side, I would love to go back. I still have unfinished business there. I was so close multiple times to winning Daytona and Le Mans. And so those are two that I really want to tick off the bucket list. But IndyCar has always been my goal. It's always been my dream. I'm sure I'll be back in a sports car at some point. If not next year, I'd love to be an endurance driver for some of the long races in IMSA. But IndyCar was always my goal. And we knew that there was going to be a stage where I'd have to go back. And last year we had the opportunity with HMD to do a partial year. And I think that was a really good segue into now where I can do this full season and really put the focus on Indy NXT and IndyCar. And having the Ed Carpenter Racing deal and having those guys behind me as well, being a junior driver for them, is really helpful. I've already gained a lot of valuable experience from Renus and Christian this year and all those guys last year as well. So it's useful to have them in my corner and get a little bit more of an insight into how an IndyCar race weekend goes. And on the HMD side, it's a really great group of people to work with. The operation's fluid, and I love all the guys I'm working with, all the crew guys, my engineer Alex. We click really well, and it's a really smooth and fluid operation.
I would imagine it would have to be pretty smooth and fluid to run 8 or 9 race teams, full time like that. Really cool operation that they have going on there. We've talked about the past a lot so far on this show, but what about the present? What were your takeaways from the season opening race at St. Pete, and what do you think you and your team are looking forward to here as we look forward to the Grand Prix of Alabama coming up here soon?
Yeah, St. Pete was a bit of a tough one for us in the 14 car. I think that we had strong pace all weekend, and that's kind of why the end result was a bit disappointing. Obviously, it's been tough for me. It's no secret. It's been a bit tough for me to adapt to the Indy NXT car coming from the sports car. One of the things I learned very quickly is that my driving style really suited that P2 car. The smooth style of it, the smooth nature, the braking shapes, everything that was required to drive that car is very different here. And it was harder, a lot of the Indy NXT guys that came from Indy NXT and were doing a bit of the sports car side adapted much quicker to the P2 car and could go back and forth. Whereas coming from the P2 car to Indy NXT, we discovered was a bit harder. And it's been a bit tricky to adapt to something that's so unique. I think the Indy NXT car is a lot different than most Formula cars. It behaves in strange ways. It doesn't have the exact feeling that you would expect from the type of car it is. It's very light and nimble, which is the expected part, but a lot of the uneasy feeling that it gives you from the rear. It's very loose. It's very skittish. It's a super hustle car. And we call IndyCar a hustle car, but when you look at onboards from Indy NXT and IndyCar and you compare the hands, it's a pretty drastic difference. You can tell that Indy NXT is much more on the limit everywhere. And that's been hard for me to get used to. So I've really been focusing on working on myself and on my driving in the winter. I think that, coming into this year, we have just kept up the goal of learning and improving. The nice thing for me now is I'm at a stage in my career where I've got time. I'm super young. A lot of the IndyCar guys are not, young stars and young talent coming in. It's a lot of older guys. And so I definitely have a bit of time to work with and develop my skills and myself. I've always been quite strong on wanting to be adaptable and wanting to be good in whatever I touch. I'm well known for loving motorsports to the point where I've driven a lot of different cars, including, dirt cars. I've driven micro sprints. I was back at the Tulsa Shootout at the start of the year. So I've driven a lot of different cars, and I want to be good in whatever I can be at. I think there's always value in learning different disciplines. And so that's part of why I'm really fighting to learn this car before going to IndyCar. I think that, the big takeaways from St. Pete was we had a lot of pace, which for me was a big positive. Coming in practice, we were 8th and 4th respectively. And we could see that there was a lot of progress being made. I definitely struggled in turn 10 more where I found the wall last year during the race. So I lacked a bit of confidence there, which wasn't too surprising afterwards from last year, where I made a mistake in that race. I think that in general qualifying, I just didn't get the lap together. I did 2 laps back to back that were very close time wise, but the first one, which is a bit quicker, got deleted. So it was just a bit of a shame. I think we had a lot more pace in that car, and then the penalty in the race, the move on Chadwick was accidental. She broke earlier than I expected, and I didn't want to hit her from behind, so I figured I might as well just go for it and see how it works out. And unfortunately, it didn't work out great for either of us. So that was a bit of an unfortunate incident, and one that I'm unhappy about with myself, because I think it could have been avoided. But at the same time, I'm proud of the guys. We had a quick car all weekend, and even with the penalty, we still managed to drive back to 13th. So we got close to where we started, and I think that there was a lot of positives to take away from an overall pretty sour weekend at the end. But definitely, the car has pace. The team's working well. We're learning every weekend, and as Alex put it, from looking at my data over the weekend and in his report, I look like a totally different driver from last year. So it's there's a lot of positives going into Barber. I think Barber might be a bit tricky for us, as it's not been my best track in this car. I think where I've struggled the most in Indy NXT has been the high speed, high commitment, and Barber is all about that. So I'm looking forward to the challenge and seeing what I can do with this Indy NXT car on Barber.
We talk about wanting to race in all sorts of different disciplines. That kind of sounds like a guy I know, Kyle Larson. And if you haven't heard, he's a pretty darn good race car driver. Great, you're always trying to get in different disciplines of racing. Is there any big difference when you look at this Indy NXT schedule? When you look at the IndyCar schedule, it is pretty varied as far as motorsport schedule goes, going from short ovals like Iowa and Milwaukee to road courses like St. Pete and Barber. Is there anything for you that you have to really adjust to when you're looking at the calendar and you say, okay, this week we're at a road course, this week we're at an oval? Are there any big adjustments you have to make as a driver going from one week to the next when your schedule is so varied like that?
I think that different tracks require different styles. Like I touched on with Barber being really fast and high commitment. Every track is a little bit different. They all have different characteristics and they all have different requirements. And as a driver, you're going to find there's tracks where you are better and tracks where you're worse. There's tracks where you'll click with it more, you understand the car, what's happening. And there's going to be tracks where it's a bit more difficult to find your rhythm. And I think that that's one of the things that makes me so drawn to IndyCar is this varied schedule, this varying level of racing. They don't just stick to one thing. It's not only street circuits, it's not only road courses, it's not only ovals, it's all the above. And to be good at all those different disciplines is tricky. You can look at all the guys in IndyCar and you realize pretty quickly if you look at results that there's some that are better on the ovals, some that are better on road courses, and some that are better on street circuits. And it all depends on driving styles. Street circuits, especially in America, are really bumpy. Bumps upset the balance of the car. They change the way the car feels. And a lot of street circuit driving comes down to adaptability because the track's always changing. And it's about how can it's about who can find the limit the quickest every lap because the track is constantly getting quicker from practice to qualifying. And on a road course, it's a little bit different. The track is more in a constant state. It still gets a bit quicker, but the track doesn't change a whole lot. It's very consistent. And so if you can in turn be consistent, you can find that limit. And on an oval, a lot of what we do on the ovals is about precision. Ovals are more of a smooth driving style. You need to be smooth with your feet, quick with your hands. This Indy NXT is still violent around an oval. It's still on the limit. You still have a lot of counter steering to do. But you still, to kind of manage it, you need to be more smooth with your hands and with your feet. And I think at this kind of varying level of driving styles and difficulty makes the series interesting. It makes Indy NXT and IndyCar something unique. I definitely think that you do have to adapt a little bit. And that's part of it. That's part of why I go do different disciplines and try and put myself in different cars. I think that, what I've learned from dirt racing and an endurance, there's aspects of it that can for sure help me in an Indy NXT car and an IndyCar. And I'm always looking to improve those skills.
Well, it seems like you're doing a pretty darn good job of it so far, showing pace, showing a lot of speed on all these different types of racetracks. My last question for you, Josh, you said this whole show, your ultimate goal is to get to IndyCar. When you look 20, 25 years down the line, what do you want your legacy to be? Is there any one win that you really want to have, one championship? What is the ultimate goal for you in racing when your career is all said and done? What is the one photo in the scrapbook you're going to point to and say, okay, hey, this was my goal, I attained it, I did it, and this is what I'll be positively remembered for?
I think there's two photos in the scrapbook that I'd like to have for sure, and that's an IndyCar championship and the Indy 500. But I'm a driver that wants to win a lot of different races. There's a lot of cars I want to drive, a lot of events I'd like to go to, and a lot of events I want redemption at. And so I think there's a lot that I'd like to accomplish. The question is, can I complete it all? I don't know. I'm sure there's some cars I'll never get the opportunity to drive or to be in again, but there's lots of events that I don't think people would expect that I want to go in. Obviously, Le Mans and Daytona are two that I'd really like to have in my collection and in my case. I think that those two have kind of eluded me last year. Both Le Mans and Daytona, we were really close. We were in the lead with 20 minutes left in Daytona. And Yob, a small mistake, lost the car, and I don't blame him. That's racing. It happens. He drove great all weekend, just like Guido and Francois did. And we had a car that could have won. It just, didn't go our way in the final minutes there. Le Mans, we got to lead at midnight with Tom and drove away for a bit. And then Tom dropped a wheel and unfortunately super unlucky. Some gravel cut the brake line. And we had brake failure. And I think that, those two kind of eluded me. I think we had some bad luck last year and I definitely want redemption at those two. But in terms of events that maybe, people wouldn't really expect, I love the Aussie V8 supercars in Australia. I really would like to win the Bathurst 1000 at some point. It's always been, I've always enjoyed watching that series on TV and even some dirt races. I'd love to win the Chili Bowl if I could, or the BC 39. There's lots of races that I'd like to go do and have a shot at winning. But for sure, the two main ones in the scrapbook would be the Indy 500 and the IndyCar Championship.
Well, I think if you, as long as your health keeps up, and I think it will, you're going to have a very good career in front of you. I have a feeling we're going to be hearing your name a lot, not just in IndyCar, but in those other racing disciplines. Only 18 years old, again, the youngest starter in the history of Le Mans, a guy who's already got a lot of trophies in that trophy case and is looking to add more. Josh, thank you so much for joining the show, and best of luck at Barber and Ford in your racing career. Like I mentioned, I think we're going to be hearing a lot from you, a lot of Victory Lane interviews coming up soon. So thank you for joining the show, and best of luck moving forward.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.